As we discussed in the last session, the project manager is responsible and accountable for the end result, completing the deliverables as well as achieving the same within time, cost, and quality constraints. Take a minute to think about what is the biggest challenge in achieving these goals. Changes. Yes, changes. Are changes bad? Not necessarily. More often than not, changes result in a better product. However, when changes come in the middle of the project, they have a massive impact on the timelines, on budgets, resource availability, and greatly can increase risk. So let us look at the root source behind the changes. These are project stakeholders. A stakeholder is someone whose interest may be positively or negatively impacted by the project, or who may impact the project. For example, the project manager himself. It could be the sponsor who's funding the project, the customer for whom we are doing the project, the end users of a project, the performing organization which does bulk of the work, ideas from the project's technical as well as the project management team, and other influencers like regulatory bodies, media, and so on. Now, this gives us some clarity on why changes happen on the project. If someone or a group of people are impacted by your work, then definitely they will raise concerns. Let us take a quick look at this graph here. The x-axis shows the project timeline, which means the initial part is the initiation phase, then the planning, the execution, overall monitoring control, and closing. During the early stages of the project, the influence of stakeholders can be really high. The project is yet to be detailed out, and the number of changes and ideas usually stay quite high at this stage. As the project moves towards the design stage and further towards the execution stage, there is more clarity on the project and a larger percentage of the scope is completed, so the influence of the stakeholders keeps reducing. Let us also take a look at the second curve, which is really critical for us. It shows the cost of making changes. This is not the budget of the project, but the cost of making one new change during the duration of the project. Any change which is suggested during the early stages of the project, like designing or planning, usually does not have a lot of cost associated with it. When changes are suggested during the execution phase, it becomes more expensive to implement the same. If most of the deliverables are done and changes are suggested at that time, the impact on the project could be huge. So that is why a critical role of the project manager is to collect the requirements and define the scope based on potential stakeholder needs and expectations, and then minimize the number of changes occurring throughout the project. So during the workshop, we will see how to follow a step-by-step process to define the scope clearly right from the beginning of the project, how to balance between the needs and expectations of the various stakeholders, how to also minimize any unnecessary changes to the project, avoid scope creep, and if there are any unforeseen changes, how to deliver it with minimum negative impact to the project. Successful projects have to be managed proactively. We have to start systematically right from the initiation stage. The first step is to create a project charter, which is the first formal document of a project. It clarifies the high-level scope, details out the end measurement criteria, puts down the clear objectives behind the project by aligning it to the vision, identifies any assumptions or constraints we could be beginning with, along with defining the authority of the project manager. In the workshop, we will learn the process of developing a project charter in detail and create one for your real project. We will also learn how to identify and classify the various stakeholders, understand their needs, expectations, power, and interests in our project, and create effective management strategies for the same. During the planning stage, a project management plan is created, which details out the several aspects required to plan a successful project. Let us take a quick look at these components. The first and most critical one is scope planning. Ambiguous and unclear scope can jeopardize an entire project. As we have seen earlier, changes to the scope during the project keep increasing the cost of changes and complexities the later they are made in the project. Scope changes are inevitable because stakeholders are impacted by your project. So scope planning involves clearly defining what all is included in the project and at the same time what is excluded in the project. During the workshop, we will look at a structured way on how to collect requirements from the stakeholders and define clear boundaries for the scope, along with setting a structured format for changes if required. Unclear scope can lead to scope creep, which may even make your project feel like an ongoing operations. Next, it is also critical to develop timelines to be able to know which task needs to be done when and also track progress. Budgets need to be developed to ensure availability of the funds as and when required. Quality plans detail out the standards and measurement criteria that we intend for our project and how we plan to achieve the same. A well-defined scope can directly lead to a well-defined timeline, budget, as well as a quality plan. However, to ensure that execution happens as per this plan, we need to take care of the people component of the project, which mainly starts with our own internal human resources. Unavailability of shared resources, resource calendar clashes, differences in priorities can lead to severe resource conflicts. We will learn how to plan for resources, schedule them into a calendar, as well as keep the team motivated and engaged for high performance. Apart from the internal team, it becomes essential to take care of the other stakeholders like the sponsor, the end users of the project, and also look at the external team which comes through procurement. These could be your contractors, vendors, suppliers, and so on. To bind the people together requires effective project governance and communications. So as we see, project planning has two clear components. One, which includes the scope, time, cost, and quality. The others is the people side. Successful project managers are very proactive. Despite effective planning, there could always be certain surprise elements. These are risks to the project. So after planning the task as well as the people side, effective project management requires risk planning to ensure that any potential risks are identified as early as possible and we can come up with proactive solutions for the same. Also, if uncertainties come during project execution, how do we deal with them? During the workshop, we will learn to develop different components of an effective project plan. Similarly, We will also be looking at effective practices to be followed during project execution, monitoring and control, as well as closing the project.
I hope this session has given you some introduction onto the background of projects. Looking forward to seeing you all at the session soon.